So first of all, I'll take you through the methodology and what we tried to get out of the research. And then Helena is then going to take you through some of the main findings to talk about the most popular social media platforms and how usage varies by region with some examples weaved in there. One thing that I will say is that you will get a little memory stick as you leave this evening, so you will be able to download the full report when you get back to your desks, so don't worry about scribbling lots of things. I have got something to give to you later, okay? And then we'll have some key conclusions and takeaways. So three things just to hold in your minds, really, I think, whilst we're talking about the findings. The first one is an obvious statement. Social media is not going away, but I think particularly interesting for law firms. If we compare ourselves to business-to-consumer markets, social media is absolutely everywhere. You as an individual are probably engaging with social media yourself. But law firms tentatively dipping their toe in the water. So hold in your mind as we're going through some of the usage and the audit findings, how are you personally using social media yourself in your professional life? How is your firm using it in its professional life as well? And what are the objectives? So that's the second thing. Define the purpose for your social media use. Is it for recruitment purposes? Is it for client retention? Is it for reputation management? Are there particular people who are responsible for delivering programs with social media in your firms as well? And finally, moving to broadcast and conversations. So you'll see when Helena talks through some of the findings that we can see there's a lot of broadcast going on with law firms at the moment. So they're using social media as another channel, but really it's the next step after that is to get the conversation, to use the tools to help engage in conversation and build relationships online, just as you would do in a room like this with face-to-face relationships. So the approach then, it's deliberately positioned as an audit. So what I'm not going to stand here today and say it's a comprehensive view of law firms globally, because I'd still be doing the research and Helena and I would still be locked in a room. But what we did was we looked at 110 leading independent law firms across 22 major international cities. The full report does actually list all of the law firms that we've looked at, so you will be able to look at those. We took 5 law firms in each city to try and get a representative view. And when we say leading, it's not necessarily by revenue, it's not necessarily by size. So we're looking at, you might have a particular firm in a region that is a regional independent leader within that city or in that region, okay? The 7 regions are here. No surprise, that represents the business territory for LexisNexis, Martindale Hubbell. So one of the things that we like to bring is just look at what's happening across all of that geographic region, which is effectively the world. So just to give you a quick flavour of how this broke down, we've got the 7 regions here. Western Europe, 7 cities we looked at, so Amsterdam, Brussels, Frankfurt, London, Milan, Paris and Zurich. Eastern Europe, Istanbul, Moscow. Middle East, Dubai and New Delhi. Africa, Johannesburg and Lagos. Latin America, Mexico City and Sao Paulo. North America, New York and Toronto. And then Asia Pacific as one of the other larger regions, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Singapore, Sydney and Tokyo. So quite a feat for Helena and her team to get to grips with. But what did we try to achieve with our methodology? Well, first of all, it was to appoint a partner who had a global presence to help us with some of that local market research. So that's where Burson Marsteller came in particularly useful. We split the audit into 2 parts. So we had a quantitative audit, which happened during April and May this year. And that was trying to put some quantitative figures around what are law firms doing on social networks. Are they using them? So we were looking at Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, blogs, YouTube. What's happening? How many people are using it? So we can get an idea where the popular channels are. The second element of that then was then to look at, well, what's some of the softer things that are happening? So the qualitative side, what conversations are happening? Is it broadcast? Is it interaction? Are law firms simply registering a presence and then not doing anything else? So just in the early days of the internet domain, people would register their domain, but there wouldn't be a website sitting behind it. There is some evidence there of law firms doing that to prevent that kind of cyberjacking, and Helena will talk through some examples in her presentation. So without further ado, here's Helena to take you through the usage of social media networks.
Thank you. Thank you. So, as you'll see, despite the fact that the legal industry is a comparatively late adopter in terms of the way that it uses social media, when you compare this with other vertical sectors such as financial, retail and so on, you can see that out of all of the firms that we had audited, a large number of them are actually using at least one social network for their outreach and so on. So it's worth noting that the audit also covered popular social networks, and even though there are specific regions that have their own networks, so say for instance in Germany they have their own version of LinkedIn called Xing, and also in France they have their own professional network called Viadio. We focused on the networks that had a global reach, so LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. So you'll see there, that's why, but also, of course, we focused on blogs as well. So now when we look at the overall usage by channel, you'll notice that overwhelmingly, it probably doesn't come as a huge surprise that most of the law firms surveyed are using LinkedIn. And this is mainly because this is the one that's also least likely to be blocked. Often it's the case that other networks, such as Facebook, such as YouTube, are blocked and seen as personal networks. So you'll see this is why out of these aren't percentages; these are the actual numbers here. So whereas 85, this represents this is the larger percentage, and then there's a drop as we come to Twitter and Facebook and so on. Now, one thing that may have come as somewhat of a surprise, and it did to us in our research, was the fact that blogging actually came quite low. So you'll see here that only 9 of the 110 firms that were surveyed were actually using blogs. Now, blogs is usually the first port of call for many B2B and corporate users as a way of thought leadership and presenting ideas. It's a way to differentiate, to build a community. But one of the reasons that appeared to be the case for this, firstly, there's a challenge of time. So many people don't have time to invest into blogging, because when we compare that to, say, LinkedIn, the way that people use LinkedIn is usually to register a company profile, perhaps start groups and so on, and that has a slightly lower level of investment than blogging does, and also that YouTube videos do as well. So, and also the lowest and the sort of the growing area was also social media integration. This is what this sign here represents. So this is essentially where people are putting links to all of their social profiles into one area. So this is much more of an advanced usage of social media. So people who are registered using more than one platform. So if a firm has a LinkedIn profile and a Twitter profile and a Facebook, we'll see some examples later here where firms are doing that. So going into, oh dear, I think I've gone backwards there. So, there we are. So diving further into LinkedIn usage, of the 85 firms that have a profile, you'll notice that there are other ways in which people are using LinkedIn. So groups is one way of doing this. Now, one of the really valuable things about how groups can be used is that people can use them for intern groups, so that people can pass messages on to new colleagues in that way. But also it can be used for alumni groups, but also for particular areas of thought leadership and so on. Now, one of the larger, out of all the countries that used LinkedIn groups, Clayton Utz in Sydney had a group for their summer intake of clerks. Also, DLA Piper in New York was one of the firms that had a very large social media presence on LinkedIn groups. They actually had a large alumni group as well as one for their current employees. Now, all of these groups were closed, and one of the really valuable things about LinkedIn groups is actually having an open group. So say, for instance, somebody can choose an area of their specialist practice area, and actually to use that as a way of actually attracting people to the community that already exists on LinkedIn. Because while there may be people who already know your firm through the website, but there's always a community on LinkedIn that may have people that you've not connected to yet. So that is the value of using LinkedIn groups. So then also we looked at the people using LinkedIn Answers. Now this is a slightly lesser known piece of functionality, and essentially the way that it works, it allows people to ask, it's a question and answer forum essentially, but it's broken down based on all of the different sector areas. So you can actually search for law and legal issues using their search function. So as you can see, a small number of firms have used this, and I can see one of the reasons that could possibly be the case as to why people use it a little bit less is because obviously no one wants to be seen to be offering legal advice, and I imagine that there are disclaimers that would need to be offered in that regard. So, but one example that jumped out at us was that there are people out there, which I think is probably the most important thing, that are genuinely interested in how sending over information, trying to find out information that is specifically relevant to the legal industry. And Baker McKenzie in New York had actually taken advantage of the Answers Forum to recommend a lawyer in its Chicago practice. So you can see here how it can be used as a vehicle to actually build new business as well. So we saw some emerging examples here of people using LinkedIn. So now looking at Twitter, people often usually assume that Twitter, it's for conversations, talking about what your day is like and so on. So very, very colloquial. But one of the really, really interesting things about Twitter is that you can connect with anybody regardless of whether you know them or not. So say, for instance, if I was in the technology sector, I wanted to connect to Stephen Fry. I literally would just have to follow him, and if I wanted to start a conversation with him, I could send him an @response, and it's an immediate and very, very easy way of making that connection. So looking at our research, we'll notice that people have actually begun to make those steps. So 35 firms have begun to do so. But as Bryn referred to in his introduction, it is still at this stage very, very tentative. So 24 of these have been using Twitter for has been using it for broadcasting. Now, that's a relatively easy thing to do. Generally, the way that broadcasting on Twitter works is people will often use a third-party, what's called a Twitter client, which is essentially something that you can use to automate updates from your site, and you can send them straight to Twitter. So we'll see an example. I'll just put it forward here. This is probably a better example than one, but you will see that this is the Twitter profile for Alan's Arthur Robinson in Sydney, Australia. And you'll see here that there is just simply at the very top there a news update, and this could easily be syndicated from the website. And this drives traffic back to the website as well. So people are definitely jumping onto Twitter for that purpose. I suppose the next stage is interaction. I think this is where people kind of get a bit of stage fright in terms of actually making those first steps, because as you can see with this Alan's example here, that we've got people who, one of the first steps often is retweeting. So looking at people who who are influencers in your region or influencers in your practice area, and actually giving them, basically retweeting is an example of saying, oh, what this person has to say is valuable. So now Alan's is one of the firms that is definitely one of the trailblazers in the region. So one of the sort of benchmarks of quality, particularly in B2B communications where the numbers are slightly lower than those for consumer-facing firms, is getting over that 1,000 followers mark. And as you can see, they've got over 1,500 followers. Another thing that's also worth noting, and I'm not sure if you can see from the back there, but if you look to the very far right, there's a number 78, and that refers to the number of people that were listed, that have listed Alan's Arthur Robertson as a profile worth following. So that's essentially like the Twitter version of A Little Black Book, saying these people are really interesting, and we put them on a priority list of people to follow. So the usage, so being highlighted on the link function in that way, and there's a number of other examples. Eversheds are very avid users of that. As are Baker McKenzie. There are a number of other firms within Johannesburg, London, Amsterdam in particular, that were seen to be very, very avid users. Now, obviously the numbers dropped slightly further down for Facebook. Now, often, the assumption with Facebook is, it's just something, that kids use, and that's definitely not the case now. In particular with the launch of Facebook for Business, which is a suite of tools for business users, people are increasingly using Facebook for outreach. And given the fact that Facebook has, had at last measure, 640 million users and climbing, and 50% of these of Facebook users go and log into this network every single day. So as social media policies become more cognizant of the way that people use the value of these networks, we expect this to increase. So we can see here that we've put here the levels of engagement, so the sizes of the community. So you'll see that it's still a very much a nascent area. There's not a huge amount going on yet, but nonetheless we can see that we've got 12 firms that have just under 100 fans, as well as some that have a kind of moderate number of fans, where there's a lot of engagement there. One, which is actually Baker McKenzie again, that had 100,000 plus fans. And probably the more interesting side there is the parked domains. Now, this refers, and Bryn referred to this before, to the firms that basically will park a domain just to ensure that nobody else uses it. And the reason for this is that it's often the case that when large corporate companies are often the victims of a phenomenon called brand jacking. This is essentially where people get corporate profiles and they will set up a Facebook page, say Facebook-like page or fan page, where essentially that's the shop window on Facebook for your company. And they will begin to basically do fraudulent activity, sending messages that are inappropriate using that domain. So it's often the case that people will park their domains specifically for that purpose. It's interesting that even after our quantitative study had ended, that there were still parked domains actually appearing. So you'll see, if you did a snapshot later on, there'll be another 8 or so parked domains, because people are constantly doing this to protect their organizations. But moreover, once you've actually parked a domain, it actually means that it can be used as well. So it's a great opportunity to take advantage of Facebook. Now, so this is an example of an effective Facebook-like page. So as I said, this is essentially the shop floor for your company on Facebook. And as you can see, you you can do a number of things, and then you can actually take content from the website and syndicate that to the Facebook page. So they've got lots of really interesting social content here. Examples such as they've got a series of podcasts on forensics. They've also got a blog on tax law, so they've actually taken that and syndicated that to the site, but also some things that you would expect on the website. So an about page, some discussions and so on, information, and also some photographs. Now, Eversheds in the UK has an entirely different approach. Very interesting the way we took a very close look at the way that they used social media, and they were using theirs for graduate education and actually to support graduates in terms of applying for their summer internships, but also for HR for recent graduates as well. So they were actually supporting people throughout the training process there. So yes, that was generally with Facebook, it was very it was a moderate use, and it was an area that we saw growing even after the audit had finished. So then with Facebook, even though usage appeared to be low, there was actually a concentration in particular areas. So there were 3 areas in which YouTube was actually used quite a lot. The first, strangely enough, was Amsterdam. So even though with overall, when we look at how YouTube was used, overwhelmingly it was the English speaking countries with high levels of internet penetration that were the most successful. So it may not come as a surprise that London and Johannesburg were the other 2 main users of YouTube. But Amsterdam was also a clear leader in this regard, and one of the firms in particular, called Hushof Beruma, was using it basically as a masterclass. So they also used it for graduate training and education, and they had over 23,000 uploads. So it was, quite a shocking positive way in terms of how the levels of engagement that they were actually getting using this channel. So what we've decided to do with this graph here is actually break it down by all of the different regions here. So you'll see at the top half, you'll see based on the purple looks at Western Europe, the green at North America and Latin America, the blue looks at Middle East and Africa, and then the black there is Asia Pacific. And the top half, the positive numbers here, refer to those who are active, and then also and versus not, which are the lower the minus numbers. So basically, what we've done here is we split that up per region, and as one would expect to see, overall it is Western Europe and Western Eastern Europe and North America and Latin America that are overall showing a growing level of social media usage in those regions. However, it's worth noting that this is always changing. So this was just a snapshot from April to the middle of May. When we returned after the audit had completed, another 8 firms from Singapore and also from Dubai had actually joined various social networks. So it just goes to show that this is an area that's always evolving. So now what we've decided to do is also here to provide a bit more of a deeper dive into the actual regions themselves. So as I've mentioned before, that there was firms, London and Amsterdam, that had shown the higher levels of social profile usage in Western Europe, whereas Milan and Paris were kind of slightly less, and Zurich were slightly less so. Eversheds and Taylor Wessing in London were the most avid tweeters. In the States, Hove and Lovell had a very positive, active group blog. So they used a range of, they had a range of legal experts looking at a different range of different topics. And also, in terms of one of the more successful non-English speaking users of Twitter, Brussels-based firm Elegies was using its Twitter feed. Now, one thing that was notable about Elegies is the fact that it was tweeting in multiple languages. So it had French as well as Dutch as well. So one of the challenges that lots of firms are facing at the moment, particularly as they sort of facing international audiences, which languages should they be communicating in for their various audiences. In Paris, it's worth noting that even though when we look at the levels of internet penetration and also the amount of blogging overall, particularly in the technology industry, which is very high, in Parisian firms it was much lower. There was a much lower usage of social media. I think one example that really stood out as an exception was Ernst & Young. Although obviously they obviously have a global reach in and of themselves, but they did have a mixture of French and English content within their Twitter channels there. So then moving on to North America and also Latin America. So New York and Toronto here were the trailblazers in that region. I mean, one would expect that areas such as Sao Paulo and Mexico City, where the internet penetration is somewhat lower, that we would see slightly less use of these networks. But also, it's worth noting that in all cases, even though in North America that there was greater levels of use, there was a slightly lower level in comparison to the Western and Eastern Europe of proactive engagement. So there was some very large communities, particularly on LinkedIn, but it was a question of how they were being that they were being leveraged. And as you'll see that in Latin America, both YouTube and blogging has yet to get a foothold within that area, and integration was also at an all-time low in that region as well. So just waiting for this thing to respond. There we go. Now looking over at the Middle East, as I mentioned, we looked here at Dubai and New Delhi for the Middle East, but also and Africa, so Johannesburg and Lagos. Now, in the Middle East, and I'll also be able to show you later on in Asia Pacific, there was the overall trend was for the English-speaking country to be the most prolific in terms of how it uses social media. So in this case, it was Johannesburg, and in the Asia Pacific case, as I'll flick forward here, it was Sydney. So Arthur Allens Robertson was extremely prolific in terms of the way that it used the various social platforms. And similarly, in the case of Johannesburg, there were three firms that really jumped out here. Bowman Gilfinnan, Edward Nathan Sonnenbergs, and Weber Wenzel were all had visible profiles on Twitter and LinkedIn, as well as content on Facebook pages. So these were really prolific. These English-speaking countries were really prolific users of the social media platforms in comparison to some of the other regions. So in terms of the conclusions, probably the most important thing to note here is that, as Brenda's mentioned before, is that social media is here to stay, and it's very important that we overcome the perception that it's just going to be, say, a fad or something that is only limited to the consumer marketplace. So as networks expose themselves, it's worth bearing in mind that while there is risk, there is also an opportunity in terms of content controlling and also brand ownership. And also organizations increasingly moving their communications online in any case. So social media tools are very valuable in terms of enabling this change and also amplifying the reach and in terms of the market, but also various different sectors. So law firms also have a great opportunity to take advantage to this. So in terms of what we're suggesting, I mean, ultimately it is that there's a lot, while there are lots of English-speaking organizations that are really leading the way in terms of leveraging these networks online, it's also worth bearing in mind that there are maybe local barriers, that it's worth seeing the extent to which this will grow in the future, and allow that to define how you use social media in your region. So in terms of broadcasting and moving to conversation, one thing that I'm very sort of keen to ram home here is that the success of social media, of your social media usage, is all focused on the extent to which you can move from broadcasting news to actually using conversations, and Danvers will give a very interesting account of how that will work. But essentially, this is a great opportunity to actually take your networking outside of this kind of room and sort of expand that to the wider global stage, and also the integration of social media. So there were some examples, as I showed in the earlier parts of the presentation, where there were some sites that had begun to use their homepage as a way to actually tap in to their various communities on Twitter, on LinkedIn and Facebook. And that allows people to actually see the sizes of the communities that they've got on all of those networks, and so to give a sense of their connectivity and also their share of voice. So ultimately, it's all about giving it a go. So it was all about experimenting, working out the risks, looking at the local issues that are relating to your market, dipping your toe in the water, and also refining the approach. So it's okay to go online, to start to following people, and start connecting with your contemporaries in that way. And then obviously, as issues come up, then use that work. It was all about working with the teams in terms of creation of social media policies that help you refine that approach as well. So that's the main thing I have to say there. So I'll just pass that on to Bryn to talk about Martindale.
Just two very, very quick slides before we finish, because we have you all here in a locked room. I can't resist the opportunity just to promote Martindale.com Connected, which is our own LinkedIn for lawyers. So it's an entirely free platform, but it's just for lawyers. Worldwide, we have about 52,000 members throughout the world, so that is just lawyers, whether it's marketeers, sales professionals within law firms, as well as lawyers in any way, shape or form. So it does exactly the same as LinkedIn. And just a couple of things to say is that we've also got social media links to our main legal directory as well, if some of you are aware of Martindale.com. That also integrates to your firm's social media profile on LinkedIn, and also as individual lawyers that can link to your own profile as well. If you're a recommended lawyer within Martindale.com, you can also leverage that recommendation and rating by linking that and syndicating that directly to your LinkedIn profile. So again, just an example, as Helena is talking about the integration and the ability to amplify your thought leadership and your connections, there's something that we're offering law firms and lawyers around the world just to help do that. So it's entirely free. So one of the things that you can all do is go onto Martindale.com Connected and register. The final thing is download the full report. As you leave today, we will give you a little memory stick. There are two ways in which you can download it. So you can do the traditional way, which is just go online and go to the URL. If you're feeling fairly funky, you can use the QR code that's on there as well and have some fun with your iPhones or anything else. We've had lots of fun in the office because mine doesn't work as well as somebody else's new iPhone 4. But the report gives you a lot more detail. So it looks at usage by channel, usage by region. We've also picked out usage by audited law firms just to give you more examples of what they're doing and how they're using it. Obviously, time is tight today, so we haven't given you a canter through of everybody's examples, but we've picked out some examples that we think are probably different for each region, but also give you a flavour of some of the wide ranges of how firms are using social media across the globe. We've pulled out some case studies as well in there. So there's something from Danvers, there's some points from Emma, again, on what she's going to talk about today. And then the final section is also best practices. So if you're sitting here thinking, yes, I'd like to try and formulate and organise our approach a little bit more, there's a best practice section in there. We've not talked about that today, but that again is a bit of a takeaway just to help you go back, whether you've got a responsibility for marketing in your firm, you can take that back and begin to plug those ideas into whether it be the marketing team or the partners, just to add some sensible approach to how can we get going with this or indeed improve what we're doing.